The morning came in quiet, the way good mornings do out here. Slow, with light that turned the cottonwoods along Camas Creek the color of old gold. Frost still clung to the grass on the bluff's north face. The horses breathed steam into the cold air, and the creek below ran low and clear over smooth stones, carrying the season's first skim of ice along its shallower edges. Corporal Elias Croft sat his horse at the bluff's rim and counted the cottonwood leaves falling into the current below. He was not assigned to count cottonwood leaves. He was assigned to run the northern trace for sign of movement and report back to Captain Aldrich by midday. He had 23 days left on his enlistment. He'd been counting those, too. Private Dennett rode up alongside him, cheeks red from the cold, still young enough to look excited about a morning patrol. The boy was from Ohio. He found Montana beautiful in a way that people from Ohio tend to find Montana beautiful. From a safe emotional distance, without the full understanding of what the country costs.
What do you need me to do? Just tell me.
Beautiful morning for it, Corporal.
Croft did not answer right away. He watched a cottonwood leaf catch the current, spin once, and go under. 23 days. His sister in Missoula had written that she was putting a room together for him. He'd written back saying he'd take the cot in the kitchen. He wasn't particular. He was particular about very little these days, which was either wisdom or a warning sign, and he hadn't decided which. Dennett laughed. He tended to laugh at things Croft said, which was generous of him. They rode north along the bluff's rim, the creek dropping away below them, the cottonwoods thinning as the country opened into rough grass and dry scrub. Croft ran the scout the way he ran everything, methodically, without hurry, reading the ground the way a man reads a letter he's not supposed to have seen. There was, in fact, nothing to find on the northern trace, which was either honest or deliberate. Croft had learned over 6 years in this country that nothing to find and nothing there were two very different statements. The first described the scout. The second described the land. The land kept its own counsel. He pulled up near a dry wash that cut down from the north hills toward the creek. The grass was pressed down in a long oval, the kind of oval a person makes when they step carefully rather than walk naturally. Not one person, several, going toward the creek crossing.
Not nothing, then.
He didn't say it to Dennett. He said it to himself, which was how he thought, aloud but privately, in the habit of a man who'd spent years in his own company. He got down from his horse and walked the pressed grass toward the dry wash's head. Dennett stayed mounted, watching, the boy's excitement shifting into something quieter. The dry wash went down, and then it bent north around a limestone outcrop, and then the land dropped again into a coulee, a wide, shallow depression cut by snowmelt, sheltered from the wind on 3 sides by the natural contour of the hills. Croft stopped at the coulee's rim and looked down. There were 3 fires below, very small, carefully tended to produce almost no smoke, almost being the operative word. He could smell pine smoke before he saw it. Horses picketed in the alcove at the coulee's northern end, canvas and hide shelters low and angled to shed wind. People moving below with the disciplined quiet of a group that had learned, over many months, how to exist without taking up sound. He counted what he could see. More than 30, perhaps 45. Families. Children held close, hushed, doing what children do when they understand that the adults around them are afraid. He should have backed away from the rim before anyone looked up. He'd been doing this long enough to know better. But he held there one breath too long, reading the camp, reading it the way his 6 years had trained him, taking in the details that would matter in a report. the details that would constitute the intelligence Aldrich needed. That was when the woman at the coulee's edge looked up and saw him. She was young, perhaps 20 or so, slight but carrying herself straight, hawk feathers in her braid, a medicine bundle wrapped in trade cloth under her arm, positioned at the coulee's southern end, like she'd been watching the rim rather than whatever was happening behind her. Like she'd been expecting the rim to produce something exactly like Elias Croft. She did not shout. She did not run. She looked at him the way a person looks at a thing they've been calculating and finally arrived at, with something that was not quite relief and was not quite resignation, but was maybe the place between those two words where the real decisions get made. He looked back at her. His hand did not go to his carbine. His mouth did not open to shout back to Dennett. The training said it should have. The orders said it should have. 23 days of discharge papers, his sister's cot in the kitchen, the whole ordinary machinery of his life on the other side of this moment. He stood at the rim of the coulee, above a camp of 40-something people who had run 1,000 miles and were 12 miles from the Canadian Pass. And the woman below held his gaze the way you hold someone's gaze when you're giving them a chance to be better than you expected. Neither of them moved. That was how it began. Not with action, not with orders. With stillness, at the rim of a coulee, while the cottonwood leaves fell into the creek below, and 23 days counted themselves down towards something Elias Croft had always been heading toward, without knowing it had a name. A man makes a decision before he knows he's made it. Croft understood this the way scouts understand terrain, not philosophically, but practically. He'd seen it often enough in others. The moment the feet move before the head gives the command. The moment the hand pulls back before the reason has formed. He went down into the coulee, not with his carbine raised, not shouting. He left his horse tied above, told Dennett to hold the rim and watch for approach from the south, and he went down with his hands where anyone could see them, because that was the only language that crossed every border he knew of. Dennett laughed. He tended to laugh at things Croft said, which was generous of him. They rode north along the bluff's rim, the creek dropping away below them, the cottonwoods thinning as the country opened into rough grass and dry scrub. Croft ran the scout the way he ran everything, methodically, without hurry, reading the ground the way a man reads a letter he's not supposed to have seen. It wasn't a question. Croft stopped a respectful distance back, not so far that it looked like fear, not so close that it looked like authority, and took the old man in. The leg was bad. Even from here, the angle was wrong. The man had not set up camp near anything a person might need to grab quickly in order to run.
I hear you. We moved.
I have traveled far to find this. I need you to help me return it to my people.
The old man's name, Croft learned later, was Wei Ting. He had been one of the band's best runners once, or so the story went from the woman who came to stand near him. The woman from the rim. Up close, she was younger than he'd thought, and older in all the ways that mattered. Her name was Saka. She gave it plainly, in the way that people give names when they've decided trust is the only remaining option. She told him the band had 41 people. She told him they were 12 miles from the pass. She told him the snow was coming in 3 days. She knew this from the way the creek ice had formed at the bends rather than the straights, which was a reading Croft would never have made, but believed immediately. Then she said, "Do you know what the medicine bundle is?" She looked at him with the patience of a person explaining something for the last time. She opened the wrapping, not all the way, just enough. Inside, he saw hide folded over hide, stitched in patterns that meant something to anyone who'd learned to read them. And inside that, What looked at first like dried grass, but was cord. Braided cord, knotted at intervals, each knot different. "Each knot is a name," she said. "Each pattern is a life." Croft stood in a coulee in Montana Territory in autumn of 1877 and understood what he was actually looking at. Not a camp, not a tactical problem, a library. The only copy in existence of a specific human record that would not survive the reservation system's intake process, would not survive the Army's documentation protocols, would not survive the casual violence of a world that did not know it existed and would not have cared if it did. He was 12 miles from destroying it.
Follows whoever speaks first. What'd you find, Croft? Just a small trace.
He rode back to the bluff at a deliberate pace that would not read as urgency to anyone watching from the encampment. Dennett fell in beside him and asked what he'd found. Croft said he'd found a dry wash that had seen use weeks ago, probably the main column's passage. Nothing current, no recent sign. Dennett wrote it down in the field notes the way a 19-year-old writes things down when an older man he trusts says them. Aldrich received the report in his canvas quarters, standing over a map that had the ford marked with a red X. He listened to Croft's account with the patience of a man who was also listening to something else. The sound of a story that had a missing piece. He knew, or he suspected. Croft had worked with Aldrich long enough to know the difference in his face. Suspicion looked like careful stillness. Knowledge looked like decision. What Aldrich wore in that moment was somewhere between them.
Sending you back out this afternoon. Forget it. Two of you run the ringside trace north.
Aldrich looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then he looked back at the map. Croft held steady. "Understood, sir." He rode back to the coulee at a pace that was not quite haste, but was not anything like routine. He told Dennett there'd been a change of orders. They'd run the creekside trace first, double back to the ford. He sent Dennett west to scout the tree line and took the dry wash trace north himself. Alone, moving fast. Waiteen was still at the pine trunk when he came down the second time. Most of the camp was already moving. Saka must have read the situation from the dust of his first departure and started people packing. The medicine bundle was wrapped tight and strapped to her back.
By dark. You have UNN tile then.
I hear you. The 40's too far.
"I know," Croft said.
I know.
He looked at the old man's leg and then back at the ford's direction, and then at the pass 3 miles north. The arithmetic was plain. Waiteen made a small movement with one hand that was not quite a wave and not quite a dismissal. Something between those. The gesture of a man who has chosen and does not require agreement. The camp moved north in small clusters, staying low in the coulee, using the hill contours the way people use them when they've been doing it for months. 41 people becoming the country. Croft stood with Waiteen and watched them go. By the time Dennett found him near the ford, the sun was low and the creek was going dark. 38 people were through the ford and into the cottonwoods on the far bank, heading for the pass. 3 people were not. Saka, Waiteen, and a girl of about 9 who Croft had not seen before and who was holding Saka's hand with both of hers. "Hooves on the bluff! Aldrich's column! The sound of 6 horses coming at a pace that was not quite routine." Croft stood in the shallows of Camas Creek in the last light of that autumn afternoon, with 38 people safely across and 3 people still on the wrong side, and behind him, the sound of Captain Orrin Aldrich riding for the ford. He had spent every resource he had: the false report, the afternoon's misdirection, Dennett's brief, useful confusion. He was standing in cold water with his hands visible and no more cards in the hand. He stayed where he was. The ford was the kind of place that records things. River crossings do that. The stone keeps the weight of everyone who's ever stood there. Croft felt it the way he felt most things, which was through his feet and his hands before anything reached his thinking. Dennett came to stand beside him in the shallows. The boy looked at the three figures on the near bank. Saka, Waiteen, the girl. And then he looked north at the far bank, where the last of the cottonwood gold was catching the dying light. And then he looked at Croft. Aldrich came down the bluff track at a canter that became a walk when he reached the ford's near bank. 6 troopers behind him. He pulled up 10 feet from the water's edge and looked at Croft standing in the shallows. And then he looked at the 3 people on the bank to Croft's left, and his face went through the particular sequence that Croft had seen before. Not anger first. Something quieter than anger. The expression of a man finding the shape of a thing he'd suspected but hoped to be wrong about. Croft turned to face him. The water came to his knees. He could feel every stone underfoot. No hesitation. No softening. He said it the way you say a thing you've thought about so long, it no longer has any weight except the true kind.
LIED in your report to an officer. UAI to D, enemy civilians invading military authority. 41 people, sir. 3 days from snowfall. Medicine one will see the names of every member of that band for 13 generations. I call them civilians.
Aldrich was quiet for a long time. His horse shifted under him. The creek ran over the stones with that particular sound running water has in autumn. Fuller than summer, not yet the ice-locked silence of winter. In between things. When the captain spoke again, his voice had lost its formal edge. Not anger, something more honest than anger.
Corporal, you know what happens to bands that don't surrender formally. No documentation, no ration allocation. They live outside the system until the system catches them, or until they don't survive the winter. You know this. Then you know that mercy that doesn't survive winter isn't mercy. It's a feeling.
Croft said nothing, because Aldrich was not wrong. He was wrong in the way that a correct measurement of the wrong thing is wrong, precise and useless. The reservation existed. The winter was real. The Army's food allocation was real. All of those facts were true. They were true about different people than the one standing at this ford. Waiteen stood up from the bank. Everyone looked at him. He had not stood since Croft first saw him. The leg wouldn't let him without cost, and the cost was visible now in the careful way he distributed his weight. One hand on a cottonwood trunk. He was 60 years old, or close to it.
and he had the bearing of someone who had been important for a long time, and was now spending the last of that importance deliberately.
It was not a request. It was an offering. The voice of a man who knows he is the price and has already agreed to it. Sokka put her hand on the old man's arm. He covered it with his own hand for a moment, brief, complete. And then he let go and walked toward Aldrich's position with the slow dignity of a man crossing a room he built himself. Croft looked at Sokka. She was watching Wei Tin walk, and her expression had the quality of someone memorizing something they know they won't see again. He understood. Wei Tin was buying minutes. He could not run north, and he would not run south. He was going to stand between Aldrich and the ford for as long as a 60-year-old man with a bad leg can stand between things, which would be enough, Croft realized, because Aldrich was not the kind of man who would push past an elder who had walked to him voluntarily. That much, at least, could be counted on. He looked at Sokka. She didn't move. She looked at him instead with the expression she'd had at the coulee rim, measuring, not unkind. The hawk feathers in her braid moved in the ford's cold draft. The girl pulled at Sokka's hand. Behind them on the bluff, Dennett was watching the exchange between Wei Tin and Aldrich with the fascinated horror of a person watching someone else make a large, irrevocable decision. He had his field notes out. He was writing. Croft would think about that later. Dennett, writing. Not because he'd been ordered to, because something in him understood that this needed to exist in a record somewhere. Sokka reached into the medicine bundle. Not all of it, just enough. She drew out a short braided cord, knotted at 2-inch intervals, each knot a different shape. 11 knots. She pressed it into his hand. He closed his hand around it. She crossed. The girl crossed beside her. The water came to the child's waist, and she made no sound. On the far bank, they went into the cottonwoods and were gone. At the ford's near bank, Wei Tin had sat down on a stone and was speaking to Aldrich in a low, even voice. Aldrich was listening, which was not what Croft had expected, and was perhaps all that could have been hoped for. The troopers behind Aldrich had not moved. Dennett was still writing. Croft walked out of the water onto the near bank and stood at parade rest and waited for what was coming. His boots were soaked through. The broken compass in his left pocket had its dead weight against his hip. He put his hand in the other pocket and felt the braided cord, the 11 knots under his fingers. Aldrich rode over to him after a long time. Wei Tin remained on the stone. The sun was entirely gone now, the last color draining out of the western sky, the stars beginning to appear in the east, where the sky had gone the blue-black of deep water. Aldrich looked at him for a long time. Not the look of a man deciding, the look of a man who has already decided and is trying to understand what he's decided about.
You know I'm not wrong about the winter.
I know you're not wrong about the winter, sir.
Then how do you carry it?
Croft thought about that. The broken compass in his left pocket, the braided cord in his right, the sound of the creek going over stones in the dark. The 41 people, now 39. Sokka's words. The soldier who would stand between us and the ending. Aldrich rode east without another word. The troopers rode after him. Dennett, at the last, looked back at Croft with an expression that was too complicated for 19 years old, then rode after them.
Waitin stayed on the stone. Croft walked over and sat down near him, not too close, and they both looked north into the dark where the cottonwoods had swallowed Saka and the child.
Apparently, Croft said. They sat there until the cold made sitting impractical. Then Waitin stood, at cost, and Croft put out an arm, and the old man took it without thanks or ceremony, which was the right way to take it. They made their way up the bluff track in the dark, taking the pace the bad leg required, while the creek went on below them with its patient, indifferent sound. 22 days. Somewhere north of the ford, through the pass, into the longer winter of a country that didn't have a name yet for what had crossed it. The medicine bundle traveled with the names of 13 generations, heading toward a 14th. Elias Croft put his hand in his right pocket. 11 knots. He counted them in the dark, the way he'd been counting days. Not to measure what remained, but to know what had already mattered. The cottonwood leaves were still falling into the current below. Gold and cold and going wherever the water was going. Which was south, eventually, as all water in this country went south, before the mountains turned it, before the land redirected it toward places it hadn't originally intended. He was familiar with that particular kind of rerouting. The stars were fully out now. The east was deep and clear, and going on further than any map Croft had ever carried accounted for. He walked north with an old man who couldn't run, and a broken compass, and 11 knots, and 22 days, and the absolute, uncomplicated knowledge of what he'd done, and what it had cost, and why neither of those things would change the other. Which was, by the scouts' reckoning, as close to right as a person generally gets.